Well, what happened essentially was I had a notebook, so I'd written down, I mean, I don't know how many, but quite a number of customers' details from them phoning in and going through that same process that I just mentioned a moment ago. So I had this notebook full of details for various customers. So what I would do is I would phone the bank, and at first I was just phoning up and ordering replacement cards back, and that was when I noticed the receptionist who'd been quite friendly with me, and she was not so friendly that day, and that was when I made my way up to the room, and this time didn't bother chapping the door and saying housekeeping. Just opened the door, walked in, and that was it. Hands behind the back and cuffs immediately. And I was like, I remember how indignant I was. I was like, this is a disgrace. You'll be hearing from my lawyers. How dare you? I'm a British citizen, blah, 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 blah. Was whenever I arrived back at my hotel room, instead of just opening the door and walking in, I would always knock the door. So I would knock the door and I would say, housekeeping. I didn't get a chance to do it. I heard walkie-talkies in the room. And I just dropped the bags and bolted. Now, I always kept my passport on me and never left it anywhere, just in case I had to make a speedy exit from anywhere. Obviously, I ran down the back stairs in the hotel. Didn't know quite where I was going, but I just needed to get out of there. So yeah, I ran down, ended up through the kitchen. There's chefs with like dishes, and yeah, I ran through the kitchen, out the back doors, onto kind of like a wee side street, and basically there was a guy sitting in a car, an older fella, and I don't know what came over me, to be honest with you, but I went up to his window, pulled out my wallet, and there wasn't anything in my wallet other than cards probably, but I just went like that, flashed my wallet, put it away quickly, and I said, Canadian Secret Service. And he was just, the guy looked a bit surprised, and I said, yeah, we need to commandeer your vehicle, sir.
The man himself, Elliot Castro, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us, Jim. Nice to see you.
It's good to see you, mate. It's a great pleasure to have you in the studio.
Thank you.
An unbelievable life story. Your book here is called Other People's Money. We'll plug it right now. It's available on different platforms, but mostly Amazon. Is that correct?
Aye, well, you can get it from anywhere, really, you know. Anywhere that sells books. Charity shops, whatever, you know.
As I said, it's a great honour to have you in here. But before we go into this incredible life story of yours, if you can speak me through what you've got going on in the now and the present.
Aye. Well, I've just, as of the start of this year, I've just started a mentorship programme, which has been something that I've wanted to do for a while, just with my own experiences in life. I felt that, you know, I've got probably the ability to help other people who are maybe struggling to find some direction in their life. Obviously, I had my own things to deal with when I was younger, but I think as a result of that, where I am today in life, it's given me an opportunity to help other people. I don't mean necessarily even just people that have had problems with the law. Actually, to be honest with you, none of the guys in my mentorship programme at the moment have had any sort of problems with the law. They've maybe been up to things in the past, but it's not as if they've been in and out of jail and stuff. But it's just more really, I think it's a way for me to sort of help them understand that the challenges in life are going to come thick and fast, but that they can be overcome. And you know, truly, it's about how we deal with the problems instead of the problems themselves.
It's amazing, mate. And these things come with life experience, and you've got plenty of that, which we're going to get through in the story. So as you said, using all that experience now to help people, getting the good karma back. But I'll now take you back to like the start of your story, your early memories, your first chapter in childhood.
Yeah.
I don't know how far back you want to go.
It's up to you, Jim. You ask me the questions, mate, and I'll answer them.
So even just come back to like school and stuff like that, because I know you had some issues there.
Aye. So I mean, I was I was originally from Aberdeen. I moved away from there when I was like 4 or 5, but I started my life in Aberdeen, and things got off to a shall we say an interesting beginning. So when I got to school, I was like kind of a bit different, shall we say, to a lot of the other kids. And initially that wasn't a problem. I think with some of the other kids at school, I was viewed as an interesting character. But I don't know, I was off my nut, to be honest with you. So I just never really seemed to be able to gel with other kids at school. I don't know exactly what the reason for that was. I've recently looked into whether or not I might have ADHD, and obviously if that diagnosis is confirmed, then it will obviously give me a wee bit of an explanation. I'm going through that process just now. It's not to find a label for myself or anything like that. It's just really, I think, just to understand maybe a bit more about why my life when I was younger was so much different to what the normal life is for kids that age.
You moved a lot. You moved schools a lot.
I went to, in total, over my entire school life, I went to 8 different schools.
8 different schools. Aye. So that must be difficult itself.
It was. I don't know. I mean, obviously, looking back, in retrospect, as an adult, you think, right, okay, so obviously I don't feel like I was understood. I think today's world is a bit different because there's a lot more knowledge and a lot more focus on things like neurodiversity and ADHD and stuff. Obviously, as I say, I still haven't been confirmed diagnosis, but the contacts that I've had with professionals have been almost certain, but I still need to go through the full assessment thing, to find out. But it would explain a lot. It would explain an awful lot.
It definitely would, yeah. But do you really want to find out? Just keep it the way it is?
Well, I think for a part of me was thinking recently, that if I was diagnosed, that perhaps medication might help. But actually, I'm starting to realise that I can't say for certain, obviously, because I've never been given a prescription for any medication. But I feel that actually when I'm doing things the right way in my life, like eating the right food and doing fasting regimes and stuff like that, that actually it makes me a lot better in terms of just being more clear in my head. So the clarity comes when you do these things, when you eat properly and you fast and stuff, and you make sure that you're not going out drinking and filling your face full of drink and whatever else might happen on an evening out.
That's it, mate. I've seen you when you've been on your healing journey. You're doing your fasting and that, so you can see the results in it because it shines out.
Aye.
But I know you weren't like any ordinary teenager.
No.
When you got into your teenage years, I'm sure you were only 16 and you applied for a job in a call centre. But you had to be 18, so you lied on the application. Mm-hmm. So you just changed the date of your date of birth.
I think so, yeah. I mean, I definitely shouldn't have been working there because it was 18 plus, but this is, I mean, you've got to remember, Jim, we're talking back in the 90s here.
Is it 1998?
It would have been about 98, roughly, yeah, when I started that job. I mean, the minute I was 16 years old, I was like, see you later, school, It wasn't that I loved learning, but I just didn't really have a great time at school for various reasons.
See, when you started in the call centre, obviously that was you then starting your first job. Mm-hmm. What was your intentions at that point? Did you weren't sure where you were going? You had the job and...
No, I mean, obviously I was 16 years old, so I don't really think I had any plans long term, certainly it was a job and I needed money, so that's why I got the job, but I certainly didn't have any aspirations of getting into anything crazy like what ended up happening. That wasn't on the horizon. That was just something that came pretty much out of the blue, if I'm totally honest with you. But so I didn't really know what I was doing. And actually, see, to be honest with you, sitting here at 42 years of age, I can tell you sometimes even now I still don't know what I'm doing. So it's a very lucky person who has an exact plan for their life, and I don't know many people that have the benefit of having such a plan in place.
So how long were you in the call centre before this story started to take this crazy, chaotic turn?
I don't think it was too long. I didn't work there that long. I mean, I was there for, I don't know, probably about 2 or 3 months maximum.
Right.
Maybe not even that long, actually. I mean, it's such a long time ago, I can't actually remember how long I was there for.
Going back to your documentary, I know when people started calling up the call centre, so they were giving away like personal details. And then I'm sure in your mind you started taking notes in your notepad, different things, and then doing wee tests on people. Yeah. Is that right?
Well, it is, but I think maybe just taking set the scene a bit better than that, if I can just take you back maybe a year or two before that. Yes. Because so I was, as I said earlier on, I went to 8 different schools, just because I kept getting papped out of this school left, right and centre, so what tended to happen was I'd start a new school, and then within a certain amount of time I would end up in bother for some reason. Now, when I say bother, I'm not talking about I wasn't going around beating anybody up, or it was nothing like that. It was just misbehaving. For that reason, I kept getting asked to leave schools or suspensions and things like that. So that was kind of a common theme throughout my school life. My work was always excellent. I never had any teachers criticise my work itself, you know, so I love to learn. But in terms of social skills, perhaps, maybe left a lot to be desired. But anyway, the last school I went to wasn't a typical school, if you like. So what had happened up to this point was, as I say, I'd been suspended or excluded or expelled from various different schools, and it got to a point where the education department were like, we don't know what to do with this boy. And what ended up happening was I was accepted into a school which was run by a charity called Quarriers. Now, when I say school, it was a residential unit. So it was a house, basically. It was an ex-council house, and there was myself and 2 other boys. And obviously every day the staff would be there, which they were called residential social workers. So there was a team of like maybe six staff or so. So you got, it was quite close quarters, and you got to know everybody quite well. But I think, the thing to mention at this point is at that stage in my life, I was just a crackpot. Like, I wouldn't listen to anything anybody said. I thought I knew better than everyone else. And anyway, to cut a long story short, one afternoon, so what used to happen was I would go up to school on a Monday on the train. So I would get the train from Glasgow up this place near Largs it was, on the west coast. So I'd get a train up there, it was about an hour's journey or so, and then on the Friday I would get the train back. But this one time I went up and I was on the train, and what I saw, and somebody had dropped a credit card or whatever's happened, it's ended up on the floor of the train. So I picked it up, and obviously I knew a bit about credit cards. Obviously didn't know as much as I knew a few years later, but I knew a wee bit about them. And at that time, just for maybe some of your younger viewers, this was when you had to actually sign for transactions. So obviously now it's all chip and pin or contactless. But back then, there wasn't anything like that. There was no contactless, there was no chip and pin. So all you had was a signature strip on the back of the card, and you would sign the voucher, and it would be checked against the signature. And if it matched, that was it, So I thought to myself, right, okay, let's buy my train ticket on this card, and then that'll mean that the money I've got I can keep for other things. So it sounded like a good plan, and it seemed to work. The guy came round and put the card through, I signed the voucher, and he went away. Now, at that point, what I hadn't really understood or thought about was that the ticket I bought was a season ticket. Because obviously I thought, right, if I buy a ticket for 4 weeks, it means I've got 4 weeks of train money that I can keep for myself. However, unfortunately for me, the conductor had spotted that the name on the card didn't match the name on my photo card for my train ticket. So you get a photo card, obviously, if you've got a season ticket, so that nobody else can use it. It's meant to be just for you. But he never said anything. He just walked away, and I was like, right, okay, that was easy. Having said that, I think we were 2 or 3 stations down the line. I'm sure it was like Kilburnie or some random place like that. The train came to a stop, and then it didn't move again. So I still didn't realise what was going on at that point until 2 uniformed police officers came on the train and came up and says, we need a word. So I tried to bullshit my way out of it. I said, no, the card belongs to a friend, he's loaned it to me. Which may have worked, given my age, right? However, whoever had lost the card had been quite quick in reporting it as lost. So when they've done their check, they've radioed in, and it's came back saying the card was lost. So I didn't get arrested that time. What they did was they took me back to the school. So I think at that point I was only 15, roughly. And they took me back to the school, the house. And the senior social worker was a lovely woman called Fiona. She was not happy. And I'm pretty sure she said, look, everyone's just trying to help you, and you're doing this stuff. What's wrong with you? Kind of thing, Don't think she said it quite like that, but that was essentially the message she was trying to get across. So that was the first foray into it, really, at that point, at 15 years old.
So it's like a sign for the universe, in a way. You find this credit
a bad
card.
sign.
It's a test as well, but you find that, and then no one's prepared for the mad story that is then to go on for the next few years. Because it's crazy, because someone so young as we say, that story on the train and then moving into the call centre. So that's already cemented in your mind, the thing with the credit cards and that. So back to the call centre then. How long did it take before you started thinking, hold on a minute here, I can do this?
Well, I think just to kind of explain, I still didn't know what I was going to do, right? So, you know, I think it'd be nice to have this idea that I knew exactly what I was doing, but I actually didn't. I was fucking winging it, to be honest with you. I had a notebook. So just to explain, the call centre I was working in, it was for a mobile phone network, and this was, so back in the late 90s, mobile phones had become widely available for the first time. Everybody was wanting a phone. It was just the thing. Everybody was getting phones, because prior to that they had been massive, and only really like people with a lot of money or businessmen used mobile phones because of the cost and the size of the phones as well. I mean, literally the first mobile phones, as I'm sure you've probably seen, were like in briefcases. You know, that was, the phone was actually in a briefcase. So by this point they'd become a lot smaller, a lot more accessible, and crucially a lot more affordable. So the point being, they were in high demand. So the call centre I was working in, we received inbound calls from both business and personal customers who were looking to get a phone. So as you can imagine, when folk are phoning up, they're paying for handsets and giving credit card details over the phone. So I don't even know where the idea came from, right? It was just a moment of, well, madness or ingenuity, whatever you want to call it. This customer phoned in one day, and when I answered the call, I took them through the order process, and then when it came to the payment point, for some reason, rather than just taking the payment as normal, I said to the customer, look, I'm going to put you on hold for a minute. There's just a wee check that needs to be done. So I put them on hold, and they came back and said, right, sir, I've got your bank on the line. They're asking to check some security information with you. So I went through some security questions with the guy, and I was like, what's your date of birth? What's your address? Well, some of the details I already had, but date of birth, mother's maiden name, and all these kind of security details. And the guy was like, yeah, no problem. And he just rhymed off everything. And then I was like, right, that's your order went through. Thanks for confirming all those. And that was it. And I remember thinking at the time, I was like, my God, that was easy. And I couldn't believe how easy it was, you know, it was just...
So you then had all the details that you needed. Did you know what you were going to do with them then at that point?
Not quite, no. I mean, I knew that they would be useful, but I still hadn't worked out exactly what I was going to do with them. I mean, my I hate calling it this, but my fraud career, if you like, was very much in its infancy at that point. You know, I've got a lot more to learn, and I made a whole load of mistakes. But what I always tried to do was, whenever I made a mistake, I always tried to learn from it and make sure that I never made the same mistake again. That's not to say that never happened. But you know, most of the time there was always something to learn from it.
When did it start to materialise then? When it got, as you said, more lucrative at the start?
Well, what happened essentially was I had a notebook, so I'd written down, I mean, I don't know how many, but quite a number of customers' details from them phoning in and going through that same process that I just mentioned a moment ago. So I had this notebook full of details for various customers. And what happened was I turned up at work one day, and I was I don't know, about 10 minutes late or something, and I got called into a meeting with my boss in HR, and everyone else in the office was like kind of looking at me funny when I walked in. So I was a bit worried in case maybe someone had found out that I was doing what I was doing, you know. So I got called into this meeting, sat around this table, and I can't remember if it was my boss or the HR person, but one of them said, right, Elliot, we're just here because this is now the third time that you've been late, and you have been warned about this. And I was like, okay, thank goodness it's not about to say anything else. So unfortunately, we're going to have to let you go. So I got sacked for being late, basically.
You're joking.
So that was quite ironic, given what I had been doing, but obviously no one had found out about it. So I went back to my desk and grabbed my notebook, and it was escorted out the building, you know.
And so then it just started from there then you started using the notebook?
No, not quite. I mean, so what essentially happened was I went home, and I was just kind of obviously not very happy about losing my job, because I knew that my parents wouldn't be thrilled about that as well. So as a teenager, you know, my parents, I have to say, I had great parents. You know, my mum sadly passed away a few years ago. My dad's still with us, but you know, in spite of having the usual sort of family problems, my parents were good to us. You know, we always had a roof over our head. We always had clothes in our back, and we always had food on the table, you know, and a cuddle if we needed one. But at the same time, I was doing their heads in, because at 16 years old, I was out, I was drinking, I was coming back late at night, like 2, 3 in the morning and stuff. And when I lost my job, I lost the plot a wee bit, because I was just like going out and drinking all the time. And it got to a stage where my parents were like, look, either you're home by whatever time it was, or you don't come back at all. So that was the kind of, which I can understand, right? I was a wee bastard to them, to be quite honest with you, you know. Don't get me wrong, I loved them very much, but the behaviour I was exhibiting at that time was not appropriate, you know. But as I say, so I had this notebook, and I ended up at one point just to try and escape from, I don't know what I was trying to escape from, myself probably more than anything else, but disappeared down to Manchester, which at that time seemed like this new place with like lots happening, and it just seemed like a place to be. So I went down there, and I had some money obviously from my job and stuff, but once my funds started drying up, then I had to look at other avenues, shall we say, and those avenues were what was in that notebook. So that's kind of how that started to happen.
So did you then, how did it work then? Did you call up to say that you'd lost a credit card, getting more sent out, different addresses? What was the kind of first setup?
So what I would do is I would phone the bank. Obviously, I had a way of finding out which card number was associated with which bank and stuff like that. So I found out what bank it was, and then I would call the bank and pretend to be the customer. And at first, I was just phoning up and ordering replacement cards. But instead of saying that the card had been lost, I would just say, listen, my card's actually broke. And then they would say, oh, well, that's fine, you can still use it for now, and we'll send you another card out. So at that time, I don't think they do this anymore, but what they used to do was if the card was damaged, they would send out another card with exactly the same number. So it meant that the original card still worked.
So nothing was cancelled then?
So nothing got cancelled.
Right,
yeah.
so it's a duplicate?
Yes.
Right,
correct.
okay.
So not every bank did it that way, but most of them did. So that was how things started. But obviously the problem with that, Jim, is that you've then got cards with loads of different names on. So what happened one day was one of the banks that I called when I was waiting to speak to someone. Again, this is another thing. So nowadays, most stuff is done online. You know, you either chat to an agent online or whatever. But back then, there was no. The internet was there, but it wasn't like it is now. Do you know what I mean? So most people still dealt with things over the phone. So I was on hold one day, and this message, you know they play messages when you're on hold, right? And it was like, did you know that you can order an additional card for a friend or family member, and it will appear on your bill, blah, 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 blah. So when the agent came on, I was like, yeah, actually, the reason I'm phoning is my nephew's going travelling, and I just wondered, is it possible to get a card on my account for him? And she was like, yeah, we can do that, no problem. What's your nephew's name? And I suddenly had a lot of uncles, put it that way. So I got a card ordered in my name.
So you got it in your own name?
In my own name, yeah. And then they sent that out to me. So this card arrived, and it just cleared so many of the challenges of using a card in someone else's name out the way.
So it was matching your passport?
It was matching my passport. It was. I mean, I'm not sure I had a passport at that point. Still, because the travel didn't start until a wee bit later.
That's right.
You
so,
know?
but I know your first trip was to London. Is that correct?
Aye, yeah. So
and then you went on a shopping spree.
Aye.
And correct me if I'm wrong, I'm sure the first place you went to, what's the name of the street down there? The
Bond Street.
Bond Street.
Aye.
And you went into like Gucci and all that. You bought a belt?
Yep. So, aye. So, what a sight I must have looked, if I'm totally honest with you. Because, I mean, at that age, I had never been in a position to have luxury items before. And actually, if I'm totally honest with you, when I first started doing the cards, I wasn't buying luxury items. I was buying things that teenagers buy, like going to I don't know, Topshop, Top Man, buying clothes out of there, going and buying CDs out of HMV, paying for haircuts and whatever else. But it wasn't like that luxury thing hadn't quite happened yet.
It just started in its infancy, and then materialised.
Yeah. It was only really when things escalated in terms of the the cards that I was getting, which I'll come to after, right? That's when things started to kind of get a bit more serious in terms of the values and the sort of items and things that were being bought, you know.
Try to keep up with the story, but after like the shopping spree down in London, the hotels and stuff, so that's your first trip. What hotels were you staying in?
So I think the first time when I went to London, I stayed in a hotel. I'm sure it was called the Regent Palace Hotel or something. It was just at Piccadilly Circus. That was the first time when I went to London. That's where I stayed, and it was like not a very nice hotel, shall we say?
Right.
But again, this was me. I didn't know about, you know, like luxury hotels and stuff like that. So I think in terms of when I was saying earlier on about making mistakes, I never made that one again. So I made sure whenever I travelled after that, I was staying somewhere that was decent, you know. But that first trip down to London was an eye opener, because, you know, the one thing I always say about London is, even at the high point of what I was doing when I had a lot of dough, I still always felt skint in London, you know, because it was still always like somebody that had a lot more money than you. It's a place you can go with a lot of money and still feel poor.
So how long were you down there for before you started really moving into your travels then?
Well, I was only down there for a trip. I mean, obviously I came back to Scotland after that, or Manchester, I don't know. I was moving around a lot at that time, you know. But so the kind of the more sort of serious amounts of money started to happen later. And what really brought that about was I had gotten details for a corporate card, right? And when I called up to order this card, basically I found out they had a thing you could do, right? So you could phone up and you could say, I'm going to spend this much, can you just check if that will go through? Now, the reason for that was because most credit cards have got a limit. So say it's £10,000, right? You can't spend any more than that in most circumstances. But this corporate card was a charge card. So that's different because it doesn't have a set credit limit. So essentially there is no credit limit. They will have an idea of what they're prepared to let you spend based on what you've paid off before in your history with them. But there's no preset limit. So if you wanted to check whether or not you would be able to spend X amount of money, what you could actually do is call the card company and say, right, I'm going to be using my card for, I don't know, say £12,000. I just want to make sure that that'll be okay. And what they would do is they would go and look at it. And then, I mean, this would just be done on the phone, you know, unless it was a huge amount of money, then they might have to come back to you the next day or something, right? But basically, I phoned up one time and asked about a transaction. I said, I'm going to spend this much. And they said, yeah, that's fine. And then she said, like, at the time, the most magical words I'd ever heard in my life, which was, what I'll do is I'll put a pre-authorization on that for you to make sure it goes through. And I was like, guaranteed success. I mean, it's like, you know, that's to hear that, you're like, you don't even worry. You're just like, brilliant.
It's pre-authorized.
It's confirmed. It'll go through. So that was kind of one of the things that I took advantage of.
How much money are we talking at this point on each card? Like, it's just getting out of control.
Varies because right. So I think just to kind of like explain. So this was the point at which the value of what I was buying went up quite significantly. Now, we're talking about a time when all my travel had been kind of domestic mostly. And then I think my first foreign trip was I went to Ireland. It was just across the water. I'd always wanted to go. And when I went over, I mean, it was crazy. You know, I'd turn up at hotels and hotels would give you cash on your credit card. So I'd be like, yeah, could you, you know, obviously if you're staying in a fancy hotel at £1,000 a night, you know, it's not really unusual to ask for £500 on your card. So a lot of hotels would do that. They would just add, you know, you would either put it through on your card at the time or they would add it onto the bill and you just pay it when you leave. So, you know, I was like routinely walking around with thousands of euros or thousands of pounds in my pocket, just off these cards.
And you're still only like 16, 17?
No, I was a bit older by that point.
Time?
Maybe I would say about 18, yeah. Do you know, I've got a timeline in my head, but quite often I think, right, how old was I at that point? And it's difficult to remember because the time from start to finish was about 5.5 years, you know. So,
I know you served 3 different prison sentences. can you take me to the first time then when you were arrested and remanded? Was it down south?
Aye, so that was down in England, yeah.
Coming out the shop or something, what happened?
So what happened the first time? So I got three separate prison sentences at various times. I think the first time was 4 months, the second time was 18 months, and then the very last time was 2 years. But the first time, that was, I can't even remember where that was. I think it was in Manchester somewhere. And what did you want to know about it?
So it was like you were coming out the shop, something had happened with a credit card. I'm sure it was someone, you were paying for an item, and someone shouted, "All right, Elliot," and it was a different name in the card. Is that the right moment?
Yeah, so what had happened was I was in a shop paying for something, and obviously I put it through, and then somebody's called my name, and obviously I've dashed out the shop, kind of pretty much ran out the shop straight into two coppers that just happened to be walking past. Now, I didn't get arrested that time because I managed to talk myself out of it, but that was kind of like an eye-opener, you know, and obviously I'd taken a watch going forward from that.
But moving into when you did get arrested and then you were sentenced, so did you actually serve 4 months or you were just sentenced to that?
No, you do two. You do half.
Is it, and that was in a prison down south?
That was in a young offenders institution, aye.
And what was that like?
Brutal. Like, honestly, I hear people talking about jail, and I've heard it various times in the past where people say they've come out of jail and they say it was a doddle. Right, now, I can't obviously speak for everybody, Jim, but I'll tell you right now, I think anybody who says that is talking shite. Because it's not even so much about the environment within the prison being hard, because it's not always about that, you know. Like, you could go into prison, if you behave yourself, you'll get a telly, you'll get privileges, you'll be allowed out more often, you'll get to do this, that and the next thing. But there's one thing about jail, you can't leave. Do you know what I mean? So this is one of the things that I'm very interested in now, which I think you were going to ask me about later on. So just about rehabilitation and how things are done in this country, because obviously it doesn't work. But anyway, the point being that being in prison at that point in time as a young boy, essentially. I mean, I must have been 18 or more, because you don't go to young offenders until you're 18.
Must have been a mad experience. So you're only still a teenager, spending a couple of months in prison, sentenced to 4. So the mindset then, right? I don't know, most people would say, right, I need to change here, you know, but you've served.
Oh, I did need to change. I need to change what I'm doing so I didn't get caught again.
Exactly,
yeah.
Right, so you did change, but you changed it in a different way,
yeah.
Whereas you were more, how do I say, it was like it became cat and mouse then, right, and that nobody was going to catch you, because you were a really intelligent guy, the way you were doing it. So you spent the time in prison, you got out, and you changed the game slightly. In what way? What happened?
Well, I just started to be a lot more careful, and I started to implement controls and processes that I would go through when I was doing things to ensure that I didn't get caught. Because I think that first time I got caught, there was I had receipts on me from purchases that I'd made. So from that point on, any receipts, the minute I bought something, I would leave the shop and the receipt went straight in the bin. Because then, you know, maybe obviously some items they might still be able to trace it back to a certain shop, but you know, there was no proof of how it had been paid for or anything like that.
So different targets and different tactics then. I know you said you started phoning up like hotels and that, so this is a different con altogether.
Yeah, so what happened, obviously the notebook that I mentioned earlier on only had a finite amount of information in it, and once it got to the end of that, because not every set of information resulted in success. You know, there were times where it didn't happen, or it happened, but someone realised something and it got cancelled, and so there was a lot of different things that I had to do to try and ensure that I didn't get caught. So one of the things I used to do, for example, was if I thought, so for example, if I was going on a spending spree, then before I would do that, what I would do is I would use the card in a phone box, because obviously, again, this is a thing which probably seems like a relic to some of your listeners, but you know, phone boxes used to be quite the thing, you know. So you'd go into the phone box and you'd put the card in, the credit card, and then you'd pull it out again, and it would do an authorisation check on the card to make sure that it was still valid, right? But obviously there's not anyone in the phone box to make sure. So if it goes through and you get to make a phone call, then it tells you that the card's still active. So rather than risking that in a shop where somebody might notice something, You do it that way.
Right, okay.
Do you know what I mean? Now, that's not to say you couldn't be halfway around your shopping spree and still the card might be cancelled. Because, there's so many possibilities. The person could notice, someone at the bank could notice, the system might have flagged up this is unusual activity. So there was a lot of different things that you had to think about. But you were asking about the hotels and things like that. So what happened, basically, the notebook that I had expired, essentially. The information had been used and it was no longer of any use. And I wasn't routinely searching for another way to do things. So it wasn't like I was thinking about, right, how can I now do this again? But what happened was I was in a hotel one day and I just happened to be close to the reception desk in the hotel, and a guest was checking in. So he's standing there checking in, he's giving his name, blah, 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 here's your key, your room number 321, whatever it was. And it was just at that moment that I just had this light bulb come on in my head. So I immediately sort of ran to the back of the hotel and sat in a quiet area. And then I called the hotel from my mobile. I waited a few minutes, obviously, but then I called the hotel from the mobile and asked to be put through to, I can't remember what the guy's name was, Mr. So-and-so. So they put me through to the room, and obviously the guy's just checked in, and I said, hi, it's Stephen here, the duty manager. I'm sorry to bother you. It was just to let you know there was a wee bit of a problem with your credit card. Please don't worry, these things do happen from time to time, but I just want to check with you. Got some security questions I need to ask you. I've got your bank on the other line, and just as soon as we clear this up, we'll get it authorised. Obviously, I don't want to disturb you. I know you've just checked in, blah, 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 blah. So the guy was like, oh, I'm so sorry about that. What do you need? Gave me the details, and then I was like, right, that's gone through. I'm so sorry about that. Thanks very much for your assistance. And that was it.
And
so
it just worked then?
Well, that got me thinking. People with money stay in nice hotels. And people with money tend to have credit cards with much higher limits on. So that's where that came from. And so that's what I started doing. So I would call hotels and ask for, obviously I didn't know who was staying. That one time I was lucky enough to be at the reception desk and I heard the guy's name. But you can't just phone a hotel and go, can you put me through to a guest? Do you know what I mean? So it's not really going to work.
So how did you go about it then?
Well, obviously I was quite aware that the most common surname in the English language is Smith. So I phoned up hotels and asked to speak to Mr. Smith. And invariably, quite often, there would be a Mr. Smith in the hotel. So they would put me through to the room and I would just repeat the same process.
So you done it in a way where when they answered the phone, you would, as if you were on the phone to housekeeping, you're the manager.
Aye,
so creating that illusion that.
Well, yeah. So what I did was, obviously, there's sometimes the small details make the big picture, if that makes sense. So what I started doing was, when I called the hotel, when I got put through to the room and the guest answered, I would, for just a split second, pretend that I hadn't realised they'd answered the phone. And then I would say, as if talking to someone else in the room, I would say something like, can you get housekeeping to 436? It needs sort of cleaned or whatever. And then I would be, oh, sorry, I didn't realise you'd answered. It's blah, blah, the duty manager here. And just go through the same process again.
And that creates like a safety for them.
It creates an air of authenticity.
Yes.
This is what I'm saying about small details. So small details are important because these are the things that psychologically can make people believe something that's not true. People say that a big lie is easier to believe than a small lie, but that's not always the case. It's very much the case that if you set the tone, then you can get people to believe that you're someone else or whatever.
It's mad because this is where it starts to become a lot more high profile now, because the amount of money that's on these cards that you're then using. The fraud just goes up a level. It's like you're now in the Premier League, and then this is what it's like. And then
that's one way of putting it.
You go on your travels, and it's a game of cat and mouse, as I said earlier.
Yeah. And
it goes crazy, absolutely crazy. So when you started doing that new way that you're conning the cards and stuff like that, where did you then go from there?
Well, once I started getting a hold of cards that had higher limits, I mean, I was still doing all of the things that I mentioned earlier. So I was still using my own name. Now, folk have asked in the past, well, why did you do that? Because surely that then ties you straight to it. Right? But you need to understand that, see, at the time, And it's even, in some ways, it's even the case today. But back then, banks, a lot of the time, did not want to pursue fraudsters because they didn't want it being publicised at how lax their systems were. Now, I'm not saying that they didn't have good systems in place, because some banks were better than others. There were one or two banks that, if I'd got someone's details and I knew it was this bank, I would leave it to last because I knew they'd be harder to get through. So I was always trying to look for the easiest way of doing things. But yeah, so at that point, that's when things started to escalate quite significantly. I was down in London. I just got hold of this corporate card, and having done some checks on it, I'd become aware that a transaction of even £50,000 would go through no problem at all. So that was the point at which I thought, right, okay, let's see what we can do here. So I came out of whatever hotel I was staying in, central London, and I walked down Regent Street to the British Airways office. So this was like the flagship British Airways office. And I walked in, and one of the first things I saw was down at the far end of the shop was a sign saying first class travel. So obviously that was like a red rag to a bull almost. So I thought, right, okay, let's go. Now, you need to believe me when I tell you that I still had no idea where I was going. Right? I really didn't. I just literally picked up this card and that was it. So went down to the desk, and she said, this is for first class travel only. And I was like, yes, I know. And she said, have a seat, sir. Whole demeanour changed after that. I mean, you need to remember I was a young boy, right? Probably didn't really look like a first class traveller, if I'm totally honest. At one point, later in the proceedings, one of the detectives who ended up chasing me, which I know we're going to get into later, so I won't tell you too much about that now, but one of the things that he said was that he had been spoken to by various people from different airlines who had some suspicion because there was this scruffy young kid travelling first class everywhere. Now, I don't quite accept that adjective. I don't think I was scruffy, right? But somebody obviously did. So anyway, so what I'm getting across here is I probably didn't look like your average sort of first class traveller, which is maybe why she had that reaction. Plus, add my youth into the equation. Anyway, I sat down and she said, right, so I said, how can I help you? Where would you like to go? Now, as I say, literally until that moment, I didn't know where I was going, but I saw a poster on the wall for Canada. And I thought, Toronto. Just don't know why, just because that poster was there. She said, Toronto, when would you like to go? And I said, well, I'm looking to go quite soon, tomorrow preferably. So she, typed all the details in. She's right, and get you first class going out tomorrow from Heathrow to Pearson, which is the airport in Toronto. It'll be, I'm sure it was £8,400 or something like that. And I was like, yep, that's fine, no problem. Again, just in terms of trying to add authenticity to it, I said, I presume you can provide a VAT receipt. She said, oh, no problem, that's fine. So, I know, wild. So she's took the card, and obviously I had done the thing, phoned them beforehand. I said, yeah, there's some travel being booked, no problem. How much? I said, it could be up to 15,000, I'm not too sure. She said, that's fine, I've pre-authorised that for you now. So, unsurprisingly, the card went through, no bother, signed the slip, that was it. And then went to Toronto the next day.
So, you arrive in Canada, Toronto. Your first time in Toronto, obviously.
Yeah.
What were you expecting? Did you book into the Hilton?
The first time I went, I stayed at the Hilton, yeah.
Right. Because, as I say, going back to your documentary, there's mad stories in there, but it's good to sit with you, hear it from the man himself. But I know you were
man himself. You never say that, Jim.
I never say that. Never say that. You're the first person I've said that
I'm sure.
to. But as I say, I was gripped by it because it's so fascinating. How can this young guy be so intelligent and outdo all these agents and stuff like that? So this is where it goes mad, right? But you're not arrested right away. You're not caught in Canada the first time. Is that right?
No, that's right. So the first time, what happened, I went to Canada that first time. I stayed at the Hilton. There's probably more than one Hilton in Toronto, but it was the one in the centre of Canada, in the centre of Toronto. So I booked a room. It was a suite, and everything was fine. I went and did the things that people do when they go to Toronto. I went up the CN Tower, and I think there was a fairground, or not a fairground, like a theme park, Canada's Wonderland or something, I want to say. Went to that, went out drinking, obviously. I mean, that was the thing for me at the time, was the drinking. I just loved going out and drinking and boozing, having a great time, dancing, whatever else. And then I would be like, but I think just to kind of maybe set the tone a wee bit, just to kind of let you know, this was the routine, right? So the routine was, I would go out, have dinner somewhere nice, then go drink, club till whatever time in the morning, back to the hotel, steaming, and sleep most of the day, and then go out shopping and buy like new clothes again.
Every day, just
Not every single day, but most days, you know, like
living the high life.
I'm one of these unfortunate people that gets bad hangovers, and I've always had, even when I was younger, I used to get really bad hangovers, obviously nowhere near as bad as what they are nowadays. But I used to just sleep it off and then, you know, go out, and I just wonder what these folk that worked in the hotels thought of me, because I don't know.
So you were doing all these things, but you're leaving a trail there.
Aye, well, I suppose there was a trail of some sort, yeah. I mean, if anyone had bothered to look. So, you know, I appreciate what you said earlier on about being smart, intelligent, and all the rest of it, right? And, I'm happy to accept that might be true, but what I have to say as well is that a lot of what I got away with was down to the ineptitude of the banks and, in some respects, law enforcement at the time as well. You know, it wasn't all down to me being super smart and outwitting them at every turn. I wish I could say that, but that wouldn't be true. There was obviously some of that, you know, and I did have my processes in place to try and make sure that the likelihood of being caught was kept to a minimum. But anyway, so... so what happened at that time was I went out to, there's a shopping centre in Toronto called the Eaton Centre. It's like the big major shopping centre in the town in Toronto. Went shopping, and one of the things that I used to do, which had just basically come about after almost being caught a couple of times, was whenever I arrived back at my hotel room, instead of just opening the door and walking in, I would always knock the door. So I would knock the door and I would say, "Housekeeping," and then just wait. And if I heard anyone moving about in the room, then I would know there was someone in, and, you know, there might be something dodgy happening. So what happened, I got back to the hotel that day, and I had bags of shopping in my hand, and I did that, and I could hear, but in fact, no, sorry, before I even did that, I didn't get a chance to do it, I heard walkie-talkies in the room, and I just dropped the bags and bolted. Now, I always kept my passport on me, I never left it anywhere, just in case I had to make a speedy exit from anywhere.
So you just dropped the bags?
Aye. So I just ran away because I didn't... So to this day, I don't know who was in that room. It could have been housekeeping.
But you told me you had, as soon as you walk by reception, you get a weird vibe.
No, that was the second time.
Was that the second time?
That was the second
time. So the first time
yeah.
is when you get to the room, you hear the
Yes.
radio, you drop the bags. Is this the one you run out the back fire exit?
Yes. Uh-huh.
Through the kitchen and stuff?
Yes. So...
And then you stop the car outside?
Yeah. So I ran down the back stairs in the hotel. Didn't know quite where I was going, but I just needed to get out of there. As I say, to this day, I don't know who was in the room. Right? It could have been genuinely housekeeping, because they do use walkie-talkies, but
you're not taking any chances.
I can't take that chance. You know?
So you've ran out the fire exit.
So yeah, I've ran down, ended up through the kitchen. There's chefs with like dishes, and yeah, I've ran through the kitchen, out the back doors, onto kind of like a wee side street, and basically there was a guy sitting in a car, an older fella, and I don't know what came over me, to be honest with you, but I went up to his window, pulled out my wallet, and there wasn't anything in my wallet other than cards probably, but I just went like that, flashed my wallet, put it away quickly, and I said, Canadian Secret Service. and he was just, the guy looked a bit surprised, and I said, yeah, we need to commandeer your vehicle, sir. And he was like, oh. So the guy was like, no problem. I must have spoke with some authority, because the guy was like brand new. But
straight into character.
What I found out though on the journey, which I'll tell you about in a second. Actually, I would may as well just. So I got in the car, and he said, "What's up?" And I says, "I can't talk about it. It's top secret." And I said, "Take me to the airport." So he started driving, and he says, "Oh, I used to be in the army, you know, and I'm happy to help and all the rest of it." I was like, "This guy's a dream."
So he's buzzing.
You know? Honestly, he was absolutely thrilled at this whole thing.
He's taking you to the airport.
He starts speed. I was like, "No, you can't speed." I was like, I don't want any attention, you know. So Anyway, got to the airport, and one of the things he asked, do you want me to take you I can't remember if it was the police station or security, but what he said, do you want me to take you to the police station? I was like, no, it's fine, just drop me at the terminal. So I've turned up at the terminal. Now obviously you need to remember, I've got no luggage on me, I've got nothing, right? And I didn't want to appear suspicious, so I went to a shop within the airport and bought a suitcase and some other things and just flung it in, just so I looked like a proper traveller, you know. And then I think, if I remember correctly, I went from there to, the first flight I could get was to Chicago, so flew into O'Hare, and then from O'Hare back to Heathrow, or Paris, was it? Maybe, I can't remember. Anyway, got away, right?
Back to the UK.
Back to the UK at some point, via wherever, you know. So, as I say, to this day, I don't know who was in that room. You know, it could have been perfectly innocent, but, you know, this is the kind of lifestyle that you're living. You know, you're paranoid and you're always looking over your shoulder, and, you know, you hear a police siren somewhere and you think, are they coming for me? It's wild. You know, people often don't really ask me about that side of things, but
must have been crazy, especially a young guy.
Listen, I've never denied, Jim, that I had a good time doing some of the things I did, right? But I mean, sometimes today, sometimes I get people messaging me, young guys specifically, asking for tips on how to do it and stuff like that, and I'm like, no, I'll never want to be a part of somebody else going through that, because although I had many good times, there were a lot of downs as well. Many downs, you know. Not to mention the long-term effect that it had on various aspects of my life, you know.
Of course.
So I would never recommend it to anyone else, you know. And when I get young guys getting in touch with me, I always say, is this really what you want? You know, is this truly what you want? Because I think if you take a moment and really think about it, you wouldn't say that, you know.
No, because you spoke about it as well. It goes on your intentions and karma, you know. Yeah. It always comes back to get you.
Yeah, that wasn't really something I had. If I'm totally honest with you, as a teenager, it wasn't really something I thought about.
No,
karmic consequences. You know, it wasn't something that was in my head at that time. I mean, I was just on this journey, like, that was fucking mental.
It's a mad story, but it doesn't stop there. Continue on in the chaos, because you flew back into the UK. Did you get through the airport okay there?
I believe so, yeah, I think I did that time, yeah.
You back up to Glasgow?
Probably. You're asking me to remember where I was 25 years ago, Jim. It's not going to happen, mate. I know the brief outline of the various times and where I was at various points, but
at that part of the story, then you can educate me on this, whether I'm right or wrong. But your second prison sentence, was that abroad or was that in England?
That was here.
That was here, that's right. So the last one's abroad. So take me to that then. How did that come about?
The last one's here as well.
Is it?
Aye, yeah.
But I know you were also in...
So there was...
So is there...
I was in prison 3 times here, and I was in prison in Ireland once, and I was in prison in Canada once.
So there's 5 then?
So there's 5 times, or maybe even 6 or 7 times that I was in the jail, but not necessarily for a long period of time. I was maybe on remand for a week or something, you know.
But the second one was in England again?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing as well. Rather than trying to just portray this as some kind of, romantic period in my life where everything was rosy, I mean, I went to jail a number of times, and I think when I counted it up, I haven't actually done it for a long time, but I'm sure at one point, a number of years ago, I counted up how long I'd spent in prison, like actual time inside as opposed to sentence time, if you know what I mean. And I'm sure it was like 3 years or something, 2.5, 3 years, you know. So to have spent that kind of long in prison, especially, I mean, obviously the older you get, the more insignificant that period of time might appear. But to have spent that kind of length of time in prison by the time I was 22, it's quite a long time, you know.
So, as I said, you need to get me right on this part of the story. When you were travelling about Ireland, because I know you went back to Canada, right? And that's an important part of the story.
Yeah.
Were you in Ireland first?
Yes. So basically, I'd been back in the UK for whatever length of time it was, just doing the same thing, moving from city to city and trying not to get caught, and, you know, all those kind of stuff, all those kind of things. And then eventually, so I'd spent quite a bit of time in Ireland, and I'll try and explain what happened. when I was over there, I got friendly with a guy who was just a good pal, you know. I mean, that's one of the things as well that I always think it's important to point out is it was very difficult to form meaningful friendships with anyone because your life was essentially a lie, you know. Now, I've always been a type of person that enjoys meeting and chatting to other people, and that was not really any different when I was younger. But obviously you can't really tell people what you're doing for a living, you know. You can't say, what do you do for a living? Oh, I'm a successful credit card fraudster. Doesn't really cut it, you know. Not considered a socially acceptable profession, shall we say. So it meant that, you know, when folk asked me what I was doing for a living, I had to vent stories, which, you know, was kind of a common theme in my life at that time. So when people used to ask what I did for a living, quite often I would say, well, I work for the Ministry of Defence. Right now, and I would say, and I can't really say any more than that, you know. And I don't know, people believed me, you know, so, but obviously I was hinting that, you know, I was kind of maybe in espionage of some sort, you know.
It's mad because then again, you change the game again because you don't have to use your passport, is that right? To travel, obviously, between North Ireland and, well, Belfast and Dublin. Is that at that point in the story?
No, that's much later.
Is that later on?
Aye, so... Yeah, that's much later. Aye, so, but I was in Ireland at that point, in the Republic, you know, so I'd spent quite a lot of time in Dublin, so I knew quite a lot of people there.
So how did it come about then? Were you on, like, did you get out on remand and then you went to Canada the second time? This is the part that I can't follow.
So what happened, whilst I was in Dublin, I had made friends with this guy, and he asked me at one point if I could, because he didn't have a credit card. Right, his mum and his younger sister were supposed to be travelling from Dublin to Birmingham. His younger sister was taking part in a bowling competition, but they didn't have a credit card to book flights. Because unlike today, back then, not everyone had a credit card. You know, it was just different times, Jim. So I couldn't really say no because, you know, what was I supposed to say? What, I can't afford it? Nobody would have believed that. Or I don't have a credit card. Everyone fucking knew I had credit cards, so it wasn't like I could say no. So I agreed to book the flights. Now the problem with this was that these flights were a month later, right? And that for me was too much time, because when I was travelling, I was always travelling like the next day or maybe a couple of days later at the absolute latest. And the reason for that was because I didn't want there to be time enough for anyone to discover that something was wrong. Because anything can happen in 2 days. You know, I mean, honestly, if I was going to book travel, I tried to book it like a few hours before I was meant to travel, if possible, for that reason. So I just had to throw caution to the wind. If I could have really thought about an excuse not to do it, then that's what would have happened. But anyway, I booked the flights and kind of forgot about it. When I came back into Ireland the next time, which I think was just after that Canada trip that you've mentioned, I arrived at Dublin Airport, and normally travelling between the UK and the Republic of Ireland, there's no passport required. Well, there certainly wasn't at that time because, you know, there was just no border control basically. But I flew into Dublin Airport this one time, and they were asking for passports. Everyone was queuing up to show passports, which I thought was very unusual, and it immediately got my suspicions up. Because whenever something happens, it doesn't normally happen. You think, well, what's going on here? So everyone's queuing up, and I get to the front of the queue, show my passport, and then just as I'm walking through, this guy grabs my arm, and it was Sergeant Declan Farrell from Dublin Airport Police, or the Garda as it's over there, you know. So what had happened was, and this is just something that I'll always regret, because when I tell you what it is, you'll understand why. So that flight that I'd booked for his mum, within the period of whatever it'd been, a month or whatever, the card had been reported, and the flights had been discovered. And when his mum and his younger sister turned up at the airport, they got arrested because of what I'd done. So I couldn't have predicted that would have happened, but, you know, I got taken away for that, and, you know, obviously I had to just admit straight away that yes, it was me, it wasn't anything to do with them, you know. It was like, no matter what, that was somebody's mum, you know. I didn't want to be fucking responsible for that, man. I felt fucking terrible, you know. It was like if somebody had done that to my mum, I would have been very angry, to say the least. So anyway, as a result of that, there was a lot of other flights that I'd taken that were discovered, and so, you know, I was in probably a not a very good position there. But amazingly, I got bail. Couldn't believe it. I was absolutely just astounded that they gave me bail, given that I was doing all the travelling I was doing.
The bail conditions are you've not to leave the country.
Oh, aye. The bail conditions were so. Aye, I'll come to that, right? Because so the first time I got bail, the first time I appeared in court, I think the charges amounted to, I don't know, about €50,000 or something like that, worth of flights and other hotels and all the rest of it. But I got bail, and they wanted me to stay in a bail hostel, so like a place where you go if it's like run by, I don't know, social workers or something. You have to go there and stay there, and there's conditions on what time you've got to be back and all that kind of stuff. So I made my way to the bail hostel, took one look at it and thought, I'm not staying here.
It's not up to your standard,
No, it absolutely was not. So I booked a hotel, and went and checked into the hotel. And what had happened was I'd booked the hotel using a company called Expedia. So I used to do a lot of my bookings through Expedia, and there was a few at Travelocity and all these kind of websites. So I went and checked into the hotel. I was in bed at like 3 or 4 in the morning, and then I heard a sound, and I woke up, and the light switched on, and Declan Farrell was standing there saying, "Morning, Elliot." So he was like, "You're some boy, you know." So obviously took me back in, and then I appeared in court again, and I got remanded for however long it was, and then I got back. I think it was like 3 weeks or something. It seemed like forever, but it was probably about 3 weeks. I got taken back to the court again for a bail hearing, and they gave me bail again, but this time they said that I had to surrender my passport. So obviously I did that, and I was, you know, part of the bail conditions were not to leave the country. So I thought, right, okay, I'm not sticking around for this. So I went. Obviously I couldn't fly out of Dublin Airport. I mean, I think that would have been really fucking stupid at that point. But what I did do is I got a train up to Belfast, and then took the ferry over from Belfast, phoned up the passport office or whatever, I think it was by phone, and ordered a new passport.
In Glasgow?
Yes. So I went and got my passport. Like, then I paid extra for the express service or whatever it was. And
where did you go?
Well, I think I went a few places, but I know what you're alluding to. So I ended up back in Canada again.
Why did you go back here?
I don't know.
I always wanted to know that, because I thought, why would you go back? But you weren't caught for anything at that point.
It probably wasn't the smartest decision, Jim. But as I say, I wasn't infallible, mate. You know, I did make poor decisions. But
by making that decision, that would then get you mixed up in one of the most notorious prisons in Canada, the Don prison. So you went back to Canada. How long was it before you were arrested?
1 night.
Because you used your own name?
First night I was there.
You actually used Elliot Castro.
I used a different name because, right, so just to explain why I'd done that. So I was using these services like Expedia and stuff like that, and I was of the mind that they might have a marker on my name. So I decided to book the hotel but change my name slightly, but not too much. So I thought to myself, in my infinite teenage wisdom, if I check into the hotel and the name is slightly different, I can just say, oh yeah, there's obviously been a typo there, I'm really sorry about that. And they would still let me check in. So that's exactly what happened. I turned up at the King George VI Hotel, I think it was, in Toronto, checked in, and I think, if I remember correctly, it was the depths of winter, I'm sure. Went out, had drinks, as usual story, back to the hotel, and then I came back to... No, sorry, it was the following day, right? So I went out the following day and then came back, and that was when I noticed the receptionist, who'd been quite friendly with me, and she was not so friendly that day. Like, she didn't say anything to me, but just I kind of, you know, waved to say hello sort of thing, and she didn't really look back, or it's a wee kind of awkward kind of moment, you know. And that was when I made my way up to the room, and this time Didn't bother chapping the door and saying housekeeping. Just opened the door, walked in, and that was it. Hands behind the back and cuffs immediately. And I was like, I remember how indignant I was. I was like, this is a disgrace. You'll be hearing from my lawyers. How dare you? I'm a British citizen, blah, 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 blah. Just trying to do anything to, I don't know what I was thinking.
They took your passport from you in the room there and then? I know they took it off you anyway.
Aye, they took, so what had happened was they took my they thought, right, so this is what had happened in the background that I didn't know about at the time. So, Declan Farrell from Ireland had been in touch with Expedia, right, as a result of me being caught there. And Expedia had discovered that I had made this booking in Toronto, right, and then they've got in touch with either the Irish police that then got in touch with the Canadian police or something like that. But obviously one of the things that the Canadian police had been told was that my passport had been seized and that they thought I might be travelling on a fake passport, which is obviously a really, really serious thing, right? So that's part of the reason maybe why they were so keen to get me, you know. So anyway, the long and short of it was there was no bail happening this time. I was sent to the Don jail, which is no longer there. I think they've either knocked it down or it's been turned into something else. But at the time, it was known as the most sort of difficult prison in Canada. The conditions were exceptionally poor. So I got remanded in custody there. And I was there for 3 months.
It was dangerous in there.
Aye, I mean,
I know you would then use your skills to protect yourself.
So that's exactly what happened, you know. I mean, when you're in a situation like that, Jim, you just have to find a way, you know.
And what happened then? How did you say, right, I'm going to use my skills here to really cement my own safety and protection?
So what happened was the wing that I ended up being put on was run by Portuguese guys, or at least they were from a Portuguese background, right? There's a lot of immigrants in Canada, right? So you would have wings that would be like, so a wing that was mostly black people, for example, or you'd have a wing that was like people from Nova Scotia. But this particular wing that I was on was run by Portuguese guys who actually were brand new with me. Obviously, I had a bit of a benefit in that I was a foreigner. Do you know what I mean? I was Scottish, and there wasn't, you know, so if that kind of wee sort of maybe helped me a wee bit, you know, and that I wasn't from there kind of thing. But anyway, over time being there, I mean, just to kind of let you into the situation. So it wasn't like any other prison I'd ever been in. I'm not going to say it's the worst prison in the world, because since then I've seen videos of other prisons in various parts of the world. I think, thank fuck I wasn't there. But it was quite bad, you know. It was the food was terrible. If you got food, some days you didn't get food, and it was just terrible. I mean, you were kind of kept in a cage. So a cage, your cell was a cage within that cage, if you know what I mean. So you'd come out and there'd be bars all around it. You have toilets down at one end, and then you'd have like 2 long tables down the centre of the cage where you would sit and have your dinner or play cards or whatever you were doing. One of the problems that I encountered straight away was that I couldn't use the phone, because in order to call anywhere from these phones you have to call collect, or like reverse charge, obviously, and I couldn't really be phoning my parents and asking them to pay reverse charge call from Canada. You know, my parents didn't have much money at that time, you know, so it wasn't really something that I was prepared to do. So again, my mind started ticking, right, what's another way I can deal with this? So I phoned up American Express and basically told them that I was calling from American Express, and that I had a card holder on the phone who needed to make an urgent call, and was there any way that they could transfer me through to this card holder's family in the United Kingdom. So they were like, yeah, no problem. So then American Express ended up just paying for the calls back to the UK for me to speak to my mum for 2 hours on the phone.
This is from the prison phone, you're just using this. And then it gets more crazy, because you start using, yes, as I say, your skills to a different level. This is.
So the Portuguese guys, where they came into it was, you know, I had a pretty good relationship with them, you know, but you couldn't, so in that prison, right, you couldn't smoke. There was no cigarettes allowed, no tobacco. And and I didn't have any money. They'd seized all my money off me. I had like $3,000 or something on me when I got arrested, and they took all that off me as proceeds of crime. So I was not in a great position, really, you know, but I came to an agreement with the Portuguese guy. So what I would do is I would arrange for money to be transferred to a Western Union location in Toronto via one of the credit cards that I had details for, and then they would get someone on the outside to go and pick up the money. So that was kind of the arrangement we ended up having. So that kind of kept me all right, you know. I was kind of looked after, and you know, nothing happened to me.
Incredible.
So yeah, it worked at the time, you know.
It didn't have, and then it gets, as I say, it gets madder because you're then released, you're getting deported, but you don't want to be picked up at Heathrow.
No. So throughout all the things that we've spoke about that had happened just before that, I'd become aware that there was also a detective at Heathrow who was chasing me. Now, how I became aware of that was this. So I had been sentenced, when I finally got to my sentencing date in Canada, I was sentenced to a year. Now, the thing was that the prisons, the conditions in that prison were so bad that judges, when sentencing defendants, were actually giving 4 days to 1 credit for each day that you'd spent in the prison because of how bad it was. So my sentence was a year, and I'd spent 3 months there, so that was me time served. Thank God, you know, because I couldn't wait to get out of there. And obviously I knew that they were going to deport me. They weren't going to let me stay in Canada, so an order for deportation was approved by the court as well. So when I got back to the prison after that, obviously the thing I wanted to know more than anything else was, when am I going to be deported? When am I going to get home? So I phoned the Canadian immigration from the prison. And the guy I spoke to was like, I said, yeah, it's Elliot Castro here, I'm being deported. I was just wondering if you'd be able to tell me when that might happen. And he said, you know, we can't give you that information for security reasons, blah, blah, blah. Told me absolutely nothing. So I was like, right, okay. So then I phoned up the next day, and instead of saying that I was myself, I just said that I was phoning from the British Embassy, put on a very stiff upper lip British accent. I said, I'm just phoning about Mr. Castro. It's just to find out his family are, you know, concerned. They want to know. And he was like, oh yeah, Mr. Castro. Yeah, he's being deported on Monday. And I was like, brilliant, thank you very much. And then before I could say anything else, he said, we've got a note here to contact Detective Ralph Eastgate at Heathrow Airport. He'd like to know when Mr. Castro's coming back. And I said, don't worry about that. The embassy will take care of it for you. And he was like, brilliant. That's one less thing for me to do. So I came off the phone and I was like, fuck. But I was like, has this worked? I didn't know. So he was obviously leaving it then to me to contact this Ralph Eastgate character. That was the first time I'd heard his name. So anyway, Monday came around and they took me down to the airport and put me in a holding cell for like an hour or something, and then basically escorted me onto the plane, put me on the plane, gave a beige A4 envelope with a like wax seal on it thing. Never seen anything like it in my life. Handed that to the head guy, the cabin crew. Now what he was supposed to do when we arrived at Heathrow was he was supposed to take me, or escort me essentially, from the plane up to border control, hand this documents over, or the envelope rather, over to the border control and say, yeah, this guy's just been deported. Now, I've been on a lot of flights in my life, Jim, right? I can tell you right now that was the longest flight I have ever had to endure, just given the fact I had no idea what was going to happen at the other end. So the ticket guy obviously came over and he was curious, you know. He said, what happened? I was like, oh, listen, you know what, mate, I ended up in a fight. I had too much to drink one night. I ended up in a fight, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, he says, I've got a boy about your age. He said, you know, these things could have happened to anyone, blah, blah, blah. You know, so then by the time we got to London, he came over and just gave me the envelope. He's like, best of luck, mate, you know. I was like, thanks very much. So I'm like walking towards border control, trying to fucking put this envelope away and get everything out of it, my passport. So what was in the envelope was my passport, the tickets, some documents from the court or whatever probably as well. Can't remember exactly all what was in there. So get to border control, hand my passport over, and the border control agent was like, looking at me, looking at the passport, looking at me, looking at the passport. And then he smiled and said, "Welcome home, sir," and passed my passport back over to me. Now, I can assure you that even at that point, I was still not out of the woods yet, because I knew I had to go through the airport. I didn't know if somebody might be waiting to jump out on me, or had no clue, right? All I knew was this detective, Ralph Eastgate, was after me, right? And I was like, I need to get out of this airport rapid. So I basically managed to get out of the airport. As previously stated, I had no money. I had nothing. But what I did have was a wee golden ticket that I hadn't even thought about. So I pulled out of the envelope came the airline ticket that the Canadian immigration had booked for me to come back. And at the bottom of that ticket was this number starting in 37. And I was like, that's an American Express card, right? And the full number was there. So I phoned up and booked a ticket back to Glasgow with that card.
So you conned the immigration service?
No comment.
Brilliant. So, well, it's not so brilliant for the viewers. But, so you travel back to Glasgow?
Yeah. So
Then
back
what?
to Glasgow, and obviously things were getting a bit tiresome, if I'm totally honest with you, right? I know some people find that hard to believe when you say that, because they just, as I said earlier on, they see or they hear about, you know, the things that you've done, the £5,000 a night hotel rooms, the yachts you were on, the flights you've taken, the first class here and there, the champagne, the limousines, blah, 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 the clothes, every aspect of it. Right, but I can tell you right now, Jim, it's a lonely lifestyle, mate, because, as I said earlier on, you can't form meaningful relationships with anyone. It makes it very, very difficult, because any relationship that you might have is essentially based on lies. So I went back to Glasgow, and at one point I was staying in a hotel in Glasgow in the town, and I went back to the hotel after a night out, so say 2, 3 in the morning, something like that. And I was in the hotel bar and bumped into a couple of DJs who were playing at the Arches. Now, I'd always been into my music, you know, so I ended up having a great conversation with them. When the bar shut, I was like, "Oh, listen, I've got, you know, the suite up the stairs. Come on, we'll go and get a drink in there." So about 4 or 5 of us went and had a drink. Came into the room, and there's like fucking Louis Vuitton luggage and all that. So they must have thought I was, I don't know what they thought, to be honest with you. They must have thought I was minted or whatever. Anyway, got on great with these guys, and, you know, eventually said, you know, you should come over to Belfast and visit sometime. Be great to see you. So I did. Not long after that, I think I ended up in Belfast and got in touch with these guys, and I think it was the first time I'd been to Belfast, actually. So ended up staying there for a while, and then I thought, you know what, let's try and make a base for myself. So instead of staying in hotels, I basically got some cash together and rented a flat right in the middle of Belfast. Like, can't get any more central, basically. And then that's when I because I was in one place, like, I didn't have to worry about hotels discovering that, you know, cards were bumped or anything like that. It was just a case of paying my rent. So that wasn't really a problem. I think the rent was like £600 a month or whatever for this penthouse flat in the middle of Belfast. And that's that's when things started I started to realise that I actually really valued having somewhere and not being on the run all the time. But one of the same things that was present at that point was that I had to kind of tell a lot of lies about myself and what I did for a living, because, you know, I was getting to Belfast and splashing the cash and getting into bars and ordering champagne for everyone and paying for cocktails and obviously you know, that kind of behaviour attracts attention. People want to know, who is this guy? You know, how is he able to afford this lifestyle, especially being the age I was. I think at the time, if I remember correctly, I think I told people lies about my age. I said I was a bit older than I was by maybe a few 2 or 3 years or whatever, you know.
Is this where that you started using that scheme that you done from the Canadian prison in Ireland?
Yeah.
And you were going about with loads and loads of cash on you.
Yes.
How much cash did you have in your backpack at the one time?
So I mean there was definitely a time when there was over 30,000 quid in that bag.
You're
know.
travelling about with that. In
So yeah, but I think obviously just to give you an idea of how that happened, you know, because it didn't just come out of thin air. So banks used to, and some of them still do, offer a service where if you happen to be overseas and you're caught without your cards, or someone robs your bag and you've got your passport and all that stolen, what they will do is they'll send you money like up to your credit limit that you can then go and pick up from like a Western Union or MoneyGram or one of these kind of places. So what I would do is I would order cash to be sent, and obviously you've got, one of the things was you had to be overseas, like, so you couldn't do it if you were in, say if it was a UK card, you couldn't order cash on a UK card if you were in the UK. It was only if you were overseas. But obviously the Republic of Ireland is a different country, so I would order cash to be wired to, like, I would set up maybe 10 transfers or something, and I would go down, I would get the train down from Belfast to Dublin, and just go around all these locations and pick up cash. And obviously I didn't have ID for these things, but they would set a password over so when you arranged it, they would set up a password for you, and as long as you knew the password and matched the description, so they would say how tall are you and what colour are your eyes and stuff like that, and as long as you matched that description, then you would get the cash. So as I say, you were asking about how much. I'm sure that the day that happened, I'm sure it was about 30 to 35 grand or whatever it was in the bag.
It's madness.
Yeah, and then I just came back up to Belfast. You know.
So going back at the start of the interview, I asked you about, kind of jumping in the story, but I asked you about when you had no choice but to impersonate the doctor.
Uh-huh.
How did that come about? I know you were travelling up from England, is that right?
Yeah, so it was a train. I think the journey was from, in fact, I'm pretty sure it was from London to Glasgow. Now, what happened was it was in the depths of winter. So we're travelling up from London to Glasgow, and about maybe halfway up the country, so halfway through the journey roughly, a call came out for anyone with medical experience to go to the buffet car as a passenger had taken ill. Now, obviously I didn't move, wasn't, no intentions of going down to the buffet car, but what happened was the ticket inspector who'd sold me the ticket had remembered that on my card it said doctor. So she came down, she's like, "You're a doctor, aren't you?" Now, obviously, it's easy to say in retrospect, right? I should have said, but I'm not that kind of doctor. I'm an academic doctor or whatever,
Dentist.
Whatever, right? I could have, but at the moment, I mean, when she just came straight up to me and said, "You're a doctor, aren't you?" I mean, I couldn't say no because the card had said doctor on it, so I was like, yes. And then she basically just said, "Come." She grabbed my arm, says, "You need to come with me. There's a passenger taking ill." Now, when I got to the buffet car, there was a younger lady. Well, she was older than me at the time, obviously. I'm going back that way, but she was distraught. She was, kind of shaking and stuff like that. And I sat down next to her, and it's basically, I'd seen panic attacks in other people, so I thought that's what was happening. But obviously, I was in no position to make a formal diagnosis, right? So I sat down, and basically through the conversation with her, she did calm down, right? I'll give myself that. I did manage to calm her down. I was like, "Listen, don't worry. Whatever it is, we'll sort it out," But she was in a frightful state at that time. Unbeknownst to me at that moment, 2 other doctors were also on the train and had made their way to the buffet car. So there was an Indian lady and a Canadian gentleman. And I'd said to the ticket lady who was there, I said, "I think she's having a panic attack." Fortunately, these other 2 doctors concurred with my diagnosis. So they were like, "Yeah, I think that's what's happening." So now, by this point, you've got to remember, I'm sat down, this lady's obviously having a really hard time. It came out in conversation that she was stressing about coming back to Glasgow because she was from Margate in Kent. I think she'd been down to visit her mum or something like that, and she came back to Glasgow, and she was stressing about coming back because she told me that her boyfriend was abusing her, and she was in this abusive relationship. Now, see, no matter what else was going on in my life, Jim, that was something that to me touched me inside, because I could see that, and I felt bad for her. So at that point, all I wanted to do was try and help that lady. So anyway, the train came to a stop at, I think it was Penrith or one of these stations in Cumbria. And the train staff had called an ambulance. So the ambulance was waiting at the station. And the lady had said, she was going to go in the ambulance, go to the hospital just to get checked anyway. And she asked me if I would be kind enough to go with her. And I was like, well, okay. So went in the ambulance. So we're on route to this hospital. And the paramedic in the ambulance was like, "So what kind of doctor are you?" and all that. I was like, fuck, I don't know what to say. So I just said, I'm a neurologist. I was like thinking that might kind of stop that avenue of questions from going any further, So we got to the hospital, and And one of the things that had happened that day, which kind of added to where the direction this story is going to go in, there had been a major road traffic accident not too far from the hospital. So the hospital was absolutely stowed with patients. We were sitting in A&E for like, I don't know, a couple of hours or whatever it was at least. And when one of the nurses came out, I said, look, do you think it's going to be much longer? Because, I need to try and get back to Glasgow. And she said, obviously this accident's happened. She said, I don't know how long it would be. And then she went away and came back a minute later and says, I'll tell you what, she says, if you go up there and just ask them, you can look over the lady yourself, you're a doctor, aren't you? And I was like, fucking hell, man. So just to kind of point out, the woman was fine at this point, she'd calmed down and, she was clearly feeling much better. So anyway, they came over and brought a stethoscope to me. So I didn't know what the fuck I was doing with this thing, but I'd seen it before, so I put it in and I just went like that on her back. And I was like, yeah, I think you're okay. I said, how are you feeling? She's like, fine. I said, right, do you want to get moving or what? So we agreed to head back to the train station. So it was Carlisle station was the closest place. Now, because of the bad weather, the trains weren't going any further north. Now, it was terrible snow and the trains were all stopping at Carlisle. But what they were doing was they were providing onward transport for passengers. Now, knowing what I knew about train journeys, because obviously I'd done loads of them, I knew that if your train didn't get to your destination as printed on your ticket, that the train company would either have to provide onward transport for you or put you up somewhere. So to try and help her out, I thought I was obviously mindful of the fact she was going back to this boyfriend. So I went into the ticket office at Carlisle and bought a ticket from Glasgow to Aberdeen. Right, and I gave it to her and I said, look, if you show this when you get to Glasgow, they'll put you up in a hotel for the night, and it might help with getting back to your not having to go back to your boyfriend. And I literally never thought any more about it. In fact, I remember telling my mum about it. Obviously I never told her I bought the woman a train ticket and all the rest of it, but I told her about meeting this woman. She was having a terrible time, and I tried to help her out, and I remember my mum saying, oh, that's good, you've done the right thing, blah blah blah. And that was it. I never, like, the whole point or the whole thought of that never came across my mind again at all, until I got picked up in Glasgow for something completely unrelated, some card transactions or something like that. I went to court, I got bail from court, and then as I was coming out of court they said, oh, there's 2 police officers from Cumbria police waiting to take you down to Carlisle. I was like, what? So I mean, it didn't click at all what the reason for this was, until, because the police that arrested me, or the ones that picked me up in the court, wouldn't tell me a thing. They just said, oh, we're just, excuse me, we're just taking you down to Carlisle. And it wasn't until we got down there into the police station and then started asking me questions about, I can't remember the woman's name, but it said, do you know somebody called? And I was like, no, I don't think so. And then they started bringing up dates, and obviously then it came out what the actual thing was, So basically I went to court for that, and I got sentenced to 4 months.
Is that for impersonating?
For impersonating a doctor, yeah.
Right.
And fraud, obviously, for the tickets and that as well.
That's madness, because, as you said, you're kind of thrown into that. The way it escalated.
I know, but then it's just what we were talking about earlier, Jim. Karma.
Karma gets you. But there's so much in this story, there's so much in the book.
Yeah.
Right? But a lot of people want to know where it stopped then. As you said, looking over your shoulder all the time. Yeah. It was an instant in Harvey Nichols, I'm sure. But for you in your own mind to say, right, enough's enough now. Mm-hmm. I can't do this.
Yeah. So that's kind of what happened. I mean, as I said to you, towards the end, I was living in Belfast and I'd made a few friends there. Now, in spite of me not being able to fully reveal myself to these friends, but if you take that side of things out of the equation, these were people that I really got on with very well, that, I loved to bits. They were good pals. Probably, if I'm totally honest, the first time in my life that I had real friends. So, I was it started to really grate on me that I couldn't be honest with these people. And one of my mates who I'm still friends with today, so a guy called Lee, he reminded me the last time I saw him, which was just last year there. He said there was one night, he said that you were pretty upset, he said, and I'm sure you nearly told me, but I couldn't, so I was close to it probably, because what I think would have been a relief would have been just to maybe get it out instead of holding it, and just having all these lies to keep up with all the time, So anyway, you're right about Harvey Nicks. So where it came sort of crashing down finally, and even this actually is a mad whirlwind in itself, because what happened, I was in Edinburgh. I'd taken one of my friends over to Edinburgh. We'd supposed to have been going to Amsterdam, but we ended up in Edinburgh because there was a fraud warning was put on the flight to Amsterdam. So on the day we were going there, I was like that to my friend. I said, I'm sorry, we can't go to Amsterdam now, and I had really to struggle to find a reason to tell him why we couldn't go. I knew what the reason was, but I couldn't tell him that. So I was like, don't worry. I said, we'll go to Edinburgh instead. I know it's not quite as glamorous, but try and have a good time there. So went to Edinburgh, checked into the hotel, and then the following morning I went up to Harvey Nicks, where I was quite well known as a customer, because I used to spend a lot of money in there. And I went in, the menswear manager naturally came out to see me. How are you doing, Elliot? Blah, blah, blah. Sorry, I've missed a very important part here.
When you go?
Right, so before I went to see the menswear manager, I went to the shop myself. So I left my friend in the hotel, went to the hotel myself and got to the customer service desk, and I asked for £2,000 of gift vouchers, and I handed over this American Express card. So she's put it through, but then she said, natural question with that kind of value of vouchers, she was like, if you get any other ID on you. And I was like so blasé and cocky about it. I was like, nah, it's fine, I don't need any other ID, just phone American Express, they'll confirm everything with you. So she did. Obviously I knew the answers to all the security questions, so when I spoke to American Express, I told them the answers. They verified it, the transaction went through, and that was it. I walked out with the vouchers, or so I thought. Went back to the hotel, got my friend, and came back to the shop like less than an hour later to start buying clothes. So walking around with the menswear manager, giving it, yeah, I'll try that, I'll try that, I'll try that. And he'd be like, what about this? And I was like, okay, I'll try that as well, Quite the lad, And at one point, I think this was literally just before I was going to go into the changing rooms to try things on, I said, excuse me, I need to go to the loo. So walked through, went to the toilet, and then as I've opened the cubicle door to come out, this guy was standing right in front of me, grabbed my arm, and he said, we need to have a word with you. And I was like, oh, feigning surprise, I was like, right, what's up? How dare you, sort of thing. And although in the past I had managed to talk my way out of various situations, that wasn't going to happen this time, for the simple fact that within my wallet, I think there was probably 2 or 3 different identities in the wallet. So there was no way. So walked out the changing rooms, and the one thing, out of everything that happened that day, the one thing I'll never forget that I can picture in my mind, clear as a bell right now, was the look on my friend's face. Because obviously whilst I've been in the toilet, they've obviously went up and spoke to him as well. And this friend had asked me, not that long before, a couple of weeks or whatever beforehand, about rumours that were circulating in Belfast that I was up to no good. And I'd said, no, don't be silly, man. Like, absolutely not. No chance, And then he just looked, I remember his face, he looked at me and he shook his head, just a look of absolute, utter disappointment on his face. And it's mad because of all the things that happened that day that's the one thing that I remember, So I got taken to the police station. I had a solid gold Rolex on. They asked me where I got it from, and I was like, yeah, I got it from an auction in Boston, Massachusetts. Just the first thing that came out my mouth,
Did they take the Rolex off you then?
Yeah, they took it off. I mean, they're not going to let you.
Did you get it back?
No, absolutely not. And the reason I didn't get it back was because that Rolex, that exact watch, had been purchased in Edinburgh from a jewellers called Hamilton and Inches on George Street. And what had happened was the last time, the day I bought that watch, I was also staying at that same hotel. And I went back to the hotel. My friend wasn't with me this time, I was just on my own. So I went back to the hotel and put the receipt in the bin in the room. And then housekeeping have emptied the bin and found the receipt and thought, that's a lot of money, we better keep this just in case he needs it. So they kept it. And then when I went back to the hotel the next time, this was obviously that day that I've just mentioned, the police have obviously inquired at the hotel, and someone at the hotel said, oh yeah, he left this receipt last time, we were keeping it for him. So my story about the auction in Boston,
so that was
went tits up at that point. So I didn't really have a leg to stand on with that.
It's madness because I know that was like the turning point. And in the life of crime and chaos, as I say, the cat and mouse, being on the run, looking over your shoulder. But for the full audience watching, the full story's in the book. It'll take you on a mad, crazy journey, right? But like I said, it's been an absolute honour sitting listening to you. The way you tell the stories, you're very intelligent, you're articulate, but you're a likeable character. You know, and you've changed your life around. You're using that life experience now to guide and help others. Before we dive into the final message, if you can speak me through what you've got going on in the now with your career and some of the stuff that you're involved in.
Yeah, so as I mentioned at the start of the show, obviously I've kind of started a mentorship programme, which actually wasn't something I intended to do, as in I didn't intend for it to be what it is in terms of a mentorship programme, but it's just turned out that way. I've kind of met some people along the way who've you know been interested in sort of learning from me. I don't mean about fraud, but I mean just about life and how to develop themselves and stuff. So I'm very, very pleased with that. It's more rewarding than anything else I've done in my life, when you're like helping other people to better themselves. As I say, I mean, even at 42 years old, I'm still having my own challenges in life, and sometimes I'm not entirely sure where things are going. But I made a decision at the start of this year that any skills or talents that I have, I want to try and use those to better not only myself but other people. And it's just such a rewarding way to do things, I think, you know, when you see other people coming on leaps and bounds as a result of some input that you've had with them. It's fantastic, you know. I'm also so I've been asked to be on the board of directors for a charity as well, which was, I have to say, I was absolutely thrilled and humbled to be asked that. That came out of the blue. So it's a charity called Aims. They're through in Coatbridge, and they help like young people who are struggling with school, home life, or just having any sort of difficulties in life. And having been there myself, I totally understand how that feels to be an outcast, essentially. But one of the things that I've kind of tried, the messages that I've tried to get across to the young people at the charity is, that there's a superstar in everyone. You just need to find it. And I truly believe that's the case. Everyone has the ability to be a superstar to someone. If only they'll look hard enough, they'll find a way to be that person.
It's powerful, mate. If there's another message now that you want to send out to anyone watching, the audience.
Well, obviously, I think I don't really have a message as such, but all I would say is if there's anyone that's watching the show that's interested to find out more about any aspect of what I've discussed, then I would encourage them to get in touch. I've got an Instagram, which I think you're going to put on the screen. So if they want to get in touch that way, that would be amazing. Brilliant,
Elliot. I want to thank you for coming on the show. A very high profile episode. We'll promote your book again. It's available on all different platforms. You can get it on Amazon, and the link will be in the description of this video. But thanks again, mate, and shake my hand.
No worries. Thanks for having me, Jim.
Thanks very much, Elliot. Cheers. I'll see you very soon.